Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Root Institute. Today, our subject is focused on the media coverage of the Black community. And we have three dynamic women with very strong opinions about how our communities being covered in the media. So I'd love for each one of them to introduce themselves. We'll start with you, April, and just tell us a little bit about kind of your interest and your focus in this topic.
Thank you so much to you, Vanessa, and The Root for having us all and sparking this incredibly dynamic conversation. My name is April Rain. I am the creator of Oscar So White, and I am an advocate with respect to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the entertainment industry.
Hi, Vanessa, thank you so much for convening this conversation. It is critically important, I think, especially now, but I think it just shows that it continues to be important. I'm Errin Haines. I am a founding mother and editor at large at The 19th, which is a new nonprofit independent newsroom that we started a little over a year ago to focus on gender, politics, and policy, but focus a lot on intersectional issues, a lot of which includes race, so combines the longtime race coverage that I was doing before I came to The 19th with coverage of race, gender, politics, and policy.
Phenomenal. And last but not least, Angela Rye.
Hello, everyone. And again, I echo the sentiment shared. Vanessa, thank you so much. It's so important. And to be sitting here with two people who I admire greatly, April and Errin, I'm just thrilled to have this conversation. I'm thrilled for every opportunity that The Root gives us, Black people, to talk about our issues our way. And whether it's in print or it's at conferences, it's so important. And so we really, really thank you. I wear many hats. I am a political and cultural commentator. I am a owner of a political strategy and social justice and racial justice firm called Impact Strategies. I am the host of a podcast called On One with Angela Rye, and I do whatever Vanessa tells me to do. So I'm here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you all, ladies, for introducing yourself. I forgot to introduce myself. I am Vanessa DeLuca. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Root, and it is my pleasure to be moderating this conversation today. So let's just jump right in. I think it's important to start out by talking about what our impressions are of the current state of coverage of, media coverage of the Black community. I mean, what do we think is people are getting right, and what are they maybe not getting quite so right?
I'll start by saying I think there's a lack of cultural competency. So we see a white man may kill his entire family on a whim, and we'll see pictures of him, jet skiing with that family. At the same time, we'll find out that a Black man has been falsely accused and arrested of a crime that he did not commit, and there's a mugshot of him. And that's baseline. That's why it's so incredibly important that we have media organizations that tell our stories with cultural competency, like The 19th, like The Root. Even Don Lemon on CNN has been doing a much stronger job of championing issues that are of importance to us. So I'm not necessarily saying that, non-Black people cannot tell our stories, but what I am saying is that there needs to be cultural competencies. And if you don't have that, you need to bring someone in, because all too often we get stories from someone else's point of view that are typically leaving out the most critical points.
Yeah, and I think probably what I would add to that, Vanessa, is that you do have more Black journalists that are in this conversation and that are forcing a lot of these conversations, frankly, around race and our culture and democracy. And I think that is critically important. But to April's point, we cannot be the only ones who are doing this work. And, it seems that we certainly have to be much more aware of what is happening in mainstream America than mainstream America ever has to be about what is going on in our communities. And that's just bad journalism in 2021, right? I mean, because we know the demographics of this country are changing, and to not be aware of how that is impacting the, who and where we are as a country now, which is really what the job of journalism is, and the media is to reflect that accurately and honestly, right? If that is not happening, then they are doing a disservice to the industry and to their audiences. And so, I will be honest, like part of my frustration around the way that those stories were being told, the gatekeepers who continue to be too white and too male in our industry, the storytellers, particularly around politics, but really in a lot of areas of coverage, whether you're talking about sports, whether you're talking about education, you name it, still too white and too male. And so, the solution for me, certainly for folks like you and for others who we are seeing kind of starting a new conversation or trying to start a new conversation and a new narrative is really just to try to start over and build the culture in the newsrooms that frankly we wish we had earlier in our careers and that we know are necessary now to have that honest and accurate record.
I think a lot of what we're getting right is not because our folks have been resourced to get it right. So I think of someone like Roland Martin, who initially had a major platform on CNN, and then went to TV One, and now is completely busting his ass to not only create content that are stories our way, but also has had to do a GoFundMe, has had to do all of these things to ensure that he could tell those stories our way. I think of something like the Black News Channel, which I'm not going on because JC Watts and friends run that network, mostly white Republican. And even though there are some of my friends who are hosts on that platform, I just refuse to do it because I'm like, y'all, I was raised by an activist. I'm sitting here waiting like, now when the hell they gonna flip the tide on this and start using that, what is that stuff called where they can make somebody's face say something and do the fake, what is it? Deep fakes. I'm like, what's going to happen with that? I know I sound like the COVID people right now, the conspiracy theorists, that kind of thing. I think about the number of people who are on mainstream platforms that get that call. I used to get it all the time. Like, I went too far on air. I said something I shouldn't have said. I said something that was offensive to a commentator who deeply offended me, but you want me to go on and apologize, right? And so there are all of these things that we're often put in boxes to do, and we can't break out of the boxes necessarily because we don't have the resources to do that. And so what I think is most important is that Black people are positioned to fund our own platforms. And I know that's something that sounds scary, particularly when you've been taught that you don't have enough power, or that your power doesn't matter. That we're put in positions where we're insulated by execs, which means ding, 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 we got to have some Black execs at some of these networks so that people don't get Barbara Fadita'd, right? There are all of these things that have to happen to ensure that people are empowered to speak their truths, our truths. And if they're not insulated, they're always going to be on the chopping block because they're a threat, because we're a threat. Everyone on here, right, has been deemed a threat by somebody somewhere. And sometimes it's friendly fire. It can be Black folks who are in those seats who are like, listen, I'm just barely sitting here. I don't know if I can rock what you says. Well, these are all things that we have to wrestle with, especially if we want to hear stories our way.
I think that is so true. And one of the frustrations that I have when I'm watching, mainstream news is that there are so many stories that can be told that are either, not reported, underreported, ignored entirely. And I just want to get a sense from each of you, what do you think are the stories that aren't being told that we need to see more of?
Well, I think for me, the main thing is to your point, representation, right? And that's whether we're talking about Afghanistan, where we need to see a lot more Black veterans front and center, a lot more Black folks in leadership in the military. On some of these cable news shows, we know that Black folks are overrepresented in our military, and yet that is not really what you see when you turn on cable news or when you're reading stories about the current situation, or if we're talking about the pandemic, right? More stories about the folks who actually are doing the work to overcome, I'm not going to say vaccine hesitancy, I'm going to say vaccine skepticism until people have information and then make choices, for themselves and their family, and also who, are able to overcome vaccine access. to get what they need to keep themselves and their families safe. Black doctors who are certainly trusted messengers in many communities, centering them much more often and earlier, telling the story of folks who are getting vaccinated and who those people are and what they look like, right? Hearing their stories much more often, because somebody could be watching that and that could really make the difference between whether or not somebody decides that day, right, that moment, to get up and go and get a vaccine. When we're talking about the moms who are scared to death and worried about sending their children to school, because they are unable to be vaccinated, right? And it's these mask mandates kind of are going on. Who are the moms that we're centering? Who are the moms that we're showing in those news stories, right? I think that matters. And so I think what the main thing that I am concerned with, regardless of what the story is what the representation is. Who gets to, what is our default setting for what, some of these sources, some of the subjects of these stories look like, and why isn't that more often a Black person, a Black woman? We have to ask those questions, and we have to wonder why, we are being excluded and erased from a lot of those stories so much of the time.
April, you mentioned earlier cultural competency. I mean, how does that play into, the fact that there are so many stories that don't get told?
I think all of the change has to come from the top down. As Angela was mentioning, we need more Black executives who say, these stories matter to everybody. Let's talk about the faces, as Errin was just mentioning, that we actually see on the screen. Let's send out Black journalists. I think about Tremaine Lee and so many others who, put boots on the ground, and that's so incredibly important. So, talking about climate change, Dr. Ayanna Johnson is a marine biologist. She could absolutely talk about this issue, as a Black woman, and how it specifically affects not just the Black community, but all communities, right? There are hundreds of Black trans women who are assaulted and killed every single year. We don't hear about that on TV. Why is that? We can talk about what's going on in the Rust Belt and farming and how people are losing their farms. Well, disproportionately, that is Black farmers. And, we saw recently there was a documentary on Netflix that told us more about our story, our connection to food and our heritage. So why aren't we talking to some of those Black farmers, right? So the stories can remain the same because they are universal in the sense that they affect everyone. But let's talk more deeply about who those people are that we are centering on those stories.
The other thing too about this is we were talking a lot about the faces who we see present and the stories that specifically speak to us, but also just perspective, right? Errin brought up vaccinations earlier. We are joking a lot, and I'm definitely a culprit about the number of people and their theories about if they scan the barcode down your arm, you're gonna see you got the mark of the beast and whatever else. Black church folks, we got to do better, by the way. But I think it's fine for us to talk about our anxiety and our legitimate fears around the vaccine. We understand. I remember having a conversation with Harriet Washington, who wrote the book on medical apartheid. And I asked a question about why do we distrust healthcare systems? And she said, the question needs to be reframed to why hasn't the healthcare system been deemed worthy of trust to Black folks? And so I think a lot of this is around just our perspective. We ain't monolithic. We know that. We say that all the time. But I think it's time for folks who benefit off of our consumerism, we turn into their channels to also demonstrate that you can have more than one Black panelist. You can have more than one Black host. You can have more than one Black executive, right? And we say these things all of the time. What is our perspective on the census and how our demographics have shifted in this country? What is our perspective on redistricting? Why do Black members of Congress take issue with bipartisan commissions that would redraw lines for districts? Because sometimes bipartisanship doesn't mean it's not racist, right? Like being able to have these types of conversations is so, so important.
I wanted to kind of flip the script a bit and say, and ask you all, if you were to create your own news organization, like what would that structure look like? And how would you instruct your team to cover like these underrepresented communities?
Well, I guess since I did that, I'll start. There were myself and four other women decided about a little over a year and a half ago that we were going to try to change the narrative around how gender and politics and policy are talked about in this country. And so we started the 19th, which is named for the 19th Amendment. But even from our inception, we recognized that we were going to have to be honest about gender, and honest in a way that didn't just celebrate women, but really or marginalized folks, but told the truth. Like I said, our most honest and accurate record. And so if you've ever seen our logo, it's the 19th, but with an asterisk. And that asterisk is in recognition of the omission of the Black women who were thrown under the bus when the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. And so that asterisk is really a North Star for us, not only as a reminder, but also in terms of our, kind of coverage ethic, that we will always think about who is still being unseen and unheard in this democracy. And so, originally we thought that this was going to be a news project that was focused on women, but that has expanded to include the LGBTQ community, who is absolutely finding a home in our coverage and feeling very seen and heard in a way that they weren't before by a national mainstream publication. And also marginalized folks, like I said, those people at the intersections who also need their stories told, and who need to feel that they are also being represented as part of the changing America that we know is there, but that is not always being reflected, especially in our journalism and in our media. So it has been a journey to try to figure out, but even at our inception, having equity as a core value of what this newsroom was going to be about was very important to us. And so, building a culture rather than trying to fix it is a different kind of challenge, but it is a worthy and welcome challenge for me. And it feels certainly like the best and highest use of what I bring to the table as a journalist, as a Black woman in this moment, to get us to hopefully a new normal in how this industry approaches these issues.
Well, I'm just curious, just to piggyback on what you were saying about, there being different challenges in structuring, a workplace where equity is paramount. What were some of the challenges that you faced in the early days that that you really had to work hard to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think expanding, our mission for one was hugely important, because, like I said, we started out being focused on women, but we recognized that we needed to be having a broader conversation about how we talk about gender differently. And that's whether, of course, we're talking about women or we're talking about, members of the LGBT community, or how we talk about men. This is not a newsroom that's going to center men, but certainly, every now and then I do have to quote the President of the United States, who's still a man, but questioning him on issues of gender, questioning men on issues of gender. This vaccine, the unvaccinated, we know, are largely white men in this country. Why are they not vaccinated? They need to be asked about that, as opposed to us pointing the finger at other folks, or not asking certain people about their beliefs, just because some people in this country believe that is a foregone conclusion. So thinking more broadly about issues of gender, especially for even as somebody who believes in inclusion and believes in equity, that is work that even I had to do. And so, I know that is work that all of us are committed to as a newsroom. The founders of the 19th are two white women who, understand that they are here to use their privilege as a platform. And yet they are also on a journey. Even before the national reckoning, they were on that journey and remain committed to that journey, even as we are a year out from that reckoning.
Angela, I'm curious about how, you're able to, because you have a podcast, you're able to kind of create content that speaks specifically to the issues that you're passionate about. So I wanted you to talk a little bit more about how, what your thought process was in, going into the podcast, and if you were to create a news organization, what would you like to see?
Yeah, so the podcast was, it provided an opportunity to kind of fill in the gaps from those really quick news segments that we normally have on air. There's a whole realm of thought. There's a whole, evolution process that we normally experience that you don't get to see in a quick kind of soundbite. And so it was an opportunity for me to really dive into politics. Well, I've evolved a little bit. And politics is no longer the center of my world. It's a part of it because I believe who we are and our values shape our politics. So it's inherently a part of that. But as I evolved, I wanted to give people a fuller picture of who I am and kind of being able to tap into that evolution. In addition to the podcast, I have a production company called 206 Productions. And even though it's not shaping a newsroom, I've realized that the content that we give people to digest is very much a part of how their politics and their values are shaped. So one project that I'm immensely proud of through our production company is something we did with Tidal earlier this year to commemorate the Black Wall Street massacre and the centennial of that massacre. So being able to sit down with Uncle Red and the other two survivors, Mother Randall and Mother Fletcher, was so important to me. And it ended up going from what was supposed to be a town hall with multiple segments to really a documentary that was edited in 10 days. That was about 90 minutes. And it's something I'm so proud of because it wasn't just storytelling my way, it was storytelling by giving honor and credence and reverence to our elders, right? And to the truth that had been buried really since the middle of the massacre. Being able to use a platform to fight for justice for folks who've been fighting for it for 100 years is something that I'm proud of. Those are the kinds of stories that I want to tell raw and unfiltered. Those are the kinds of opportunities that I want our folks to be able to tap into, not just to hear and to learn, but also to say, okay, now what's my call to action from this? That's a really important, every docuseries, every town hall, every news special I've done, there's always some calls to action. And I think that's a very important part of my work. Vanessa is something certainly that is present in you all's work. I feel like Michael Harriet, who is my cousin from another grandma, is really always doing that. He challenges the worst of us and the best of us to think differently. And even if he doesn't have a direct call to action in the Michael Harriet piece, child, you gonna learn and get read, right? So all of those things are very, very important to me. And I think most importantly, if we're talking about the construction of a newsroom, it is to ensure that we're developing the next generation of talent. Yes, we need execs. Yes, we need people of color who look like us and are hosting programs on mainstream cable news shows and on other mainstream channels. But we also need to make sure we're developing that young writer, that off-camera talent, the camera operator, the booker. We need to make sure that we're developing those folks, both in creative content and in newsroom content.
You're absolutely right. I mean, April, I know that you spend a lot of time working with companies that kind of helping them to think through what their structure can look like, how they're organized, and how they can demonstrate more diversity and inclusion. So maybe if you could talk about that a bit as well.
One of the issues that I come up across very often when dealing internally with a corporation or organization is, they understand that there is a need, right, and they want to do something, and so they want to throw out black faces and brown faces. But when you look at their C-suite, when you look at who's making the decisions, it's as white as the Oscars, so that's the conversation that we need to have, so if you are putting up window dressing on a condemned house, you're not going to be sustainable. And so we have to go back a little bit and say, okay, what are your hiring practices? Who are you bringing into the organization? And then once you have them in, what are your retention policies? Is it a revolving door? So, you can rubber stamp and say, yes, we have 3 Black folks or 3 Latinx folks or whatever the case may be. But if they're staying for less than a year because the workplace is so toxic, are you really doing anything? If you have hired a D&I coordinator or lead or whatever you want to call them, who are they reporting to? Is it just HR or do they go directly to the top? And when we talk about going directly to the top, it's their bonus tied to the equity and representation matters that they say are so important. Are you going to get that 6-figure bonus if your numbers have not improved on the inside? Those are the conversations that I think need to be had in every organization, because this is not just about media. This is also about tech. This is about entertainment. This is about education. You name it. There need to be changes across the board. And it needs to start from the inside out.
I'm wondering how we as consumers of content and as audience members, what is our call to action? How can we influence and have impact on how media sees our community and the stories that we would like to see told? Do we have some power in this, in this way or not?
It's so interesting, because I was really just thinking, there's a protest, even there's a hashtag protest, like April has led one, right? There are all of these things that we can do. And normally Black folks tend to be very reactive in our protests, right? It is in response to some wrong. And I think that what I would really love to see happen is for us to harness our collective power, our economic power, who we know, the access points that we have, and really all come together to create the thing that we're demanding from white folks. These folks don't want to give us what we're asking for because it's the right thing to do. They don't want to give that up because it's power. They don't want to resign from an executive position because that's their money, right? And is it the right thing to do? Absolutely. But respectfully, tell me when over the last 402 years, folks just did the right thing because it was the right thing to do, right? So I'm just like, at some point, we have to acknowledge that we're more powerful in creating the thing. Again, I go back to thinking about Big Bro Roro, as I call him, and all of the hustle, all of the moments where he was disappointed, people who we love and admire not even returning his phone calls to go on the program, right? Because it wasn't the same type of platform. We have to work through some of that in our own issues around worthiness. White ice is not colder. It's just as cold as ours. And if we are really cultural innovators and creators and can make platforms blow up like the Gram or Clubhouse, why can't we do that for ourselves? I understand that when we talk about that, we're like, okay, well, even our financing opportunities are nil. They're less than what a white creator could get, a white founder like a Clubhouse founder. Full disclosure, I did invest in Clubhouse, but it was a little bit. I ain't got that much money. And so when you think about even that, there are always hurdles. But when we come together, y'all, we are an unstoppable, resilient force. And I just am like waiting, and probably waiting in far too much of a passive way, for us to realize what our collective power could do when we really step into our worthiness and we really understand how big and bad we are. There's some Black billionaires out here, right? And it's time for even them to come together, to work together. I know of some that are working on some things. I'm eager to see it happen. But I want to see that happen so that we can stop betting on someone else to think that we're worthy, to think that we're good enough, to give us that spot. It doesn't come without force and without strategy. And I think that we could take that same strategy we've used to blow up these founders and to make their pockets real thick to do our own thing.
Anything you'd like to add, Errin or April?
I think that Black folks are really starting to recognize their collective power. I mean, I think about the 2020 election, how we mobilized and galvanized, even in the midst of a public health crisis, to make history, to have record turnout, that showed the strength of Black people's power politically. I think in a way that a lot of folks hadn't thought about or seen prior to, right? You've got the Congressional Black Caucus celebrating their 50th anniversary, largest membership that they've ever seen before. How that's translating into power is something that we have to keep paying attention to at this point, right? Because, I think what we do know is, especially as Black women, realizing that it's not enough to just be in the room if you're not going to have a voice, if you're not going to have influence, if you're not going to have that power. And so, that means something. Me being editor at large at the 19th is not just a title, right? If I'm not going to shape the vision and the mission and the culture of that place, then it doesn't matter what my title is, because that is the role that I, intend to inhabit. And if that is not what is happening, then, I'm not somebody that's going to be able to affect change. I think you saw, to Angela's point about those, Black billionaires, Black executives flexing their power around voting rights in that open letter. That was something that opened the door for some of these other corporations to be, putting them on notice. Why aren't you speaking out about this? Why isn't this an issue that you also care about and that you're willing to push back on? I don't think you would have had the All-Star game leaving Atlanta had you not had kind of that original catalyst. And by the way, all of these folks being encouraged, I guess is a nice way to put it, by a lot of the Black activists and organizers who are on the ground doing that work and really working to empower the Black folks who are really beginning to understand the impact of our politics on their daily lives and are just as interested in holding people accountable from a governing standpoint as they are from, a campaign election standpoint. So I think, at the 19th, we have so much of our audience that does speak with their dollars directly, right? We have philanthropic support, yes, to be sure, corporate support, absolutely. We appreciate all of those donors, but you know what? We've got 10,000 members, which we did not expect to have in our first year. And we're talking about people who are giving $19 to say that we believe in you, we are rooting for you, we appreciate what you were doing to to help us feel seen. Like, that is an endorsement of the work that we are doing. They don't have to give that money to us, but it is an affirmation of the coverage that we are doing. It's deeply humbling and deeply gratifying. Those people are not necessarily subscribing to a number of outlets. I'm not certainly interested in subscribing to media outlets that do not reflect my values and where I am not feeling seen. That is a way to let people know that they need to do better on that. They are missing audience. It should be an economic imperative as well as a moral one for folks to do better on this. But to Angie's point, don't know if that's going to be happening anytime soon. And so again, starting over feels like a much more rewarding solution for an increasing number of creators.
We're almost at the end of our time, but before we end, I really wanted to ask each one of you, since you're such amazing thought leaders in this space, what is that one piece of advice that you would give in general to news organizations, to executives, to the C-suite, to the people who are running these newsrooms day in and day out? What advice would you give them as they're striving to reach new audiences? Because we know that they're constantly pushing to reach, new people. What advice would you give them to make that happen? And we can start with you, April.
It's rough, the advice is do better, and for so much of this, the numbers speak for themselves. We just finished the census last year, and although it was a little shaky on a number of levels, we do have additional information about what this country looks like, right? And so we know that we have a burgeoning Latinx population that is growing, and their dollars are growing as well. So what are you doing to reach out to that community? Let's talk about intersections, Black and queer and disabled. Who is talking about those folks? So, for some of these organizations, it would be great. I have serious doubts about whether they would actually do it, but it would be great to just clear the decks, and start from scratch, or, from now on, from 2021 to 2023, say you're only hiring people from traditionally underrepresented, marginalized people who are on the fringe identities, right? And so are you going to get to even 50%? Probably not, but it would be a fantastic start to focus there and then talk to them about the stories that they want to hear, the stories that their families, their communities say, you know what, why isn't anybody talking about this? Flint still doesn't have clean water. We see Mari, little Miss Flint out there, holding up her signs and, GoFundMe after GoFundMe, and yet we're finding finding out that millions of PPE dollars are going to these, corporations that truly don't need them. So I would say start from scratch. I believe in meeting people where they are, but I'm also going to give you a late pass and ask you where you've been. And then, okay, great. Here you are. We're in Q3 of 2021. What are you going to do from now forward? And just, commit for the next 12 to 18 months to making significant change, and see how your numbers respond to the fact that you are being more open and more interested in talking to and with and about communities that are not just underserved generally, but are specifically underserved by your organization.
I would say that your fear created Donald Trump's opportunity. That your inability to wrestle honestly with what is and not what you wish it would be created oppressive, nightmarish, violent, especially when we think about the insurrection, um, individuals who are drunk with power they no longer hold. And so the idea of sharing power or distributing power, I know it sounds real socialist of me, but I'm not being socialist. I'm just being Christ-like. They don't like that either. But the idea of that might be scary, but it's well worth it. We are so much better off when we share power, when we hear perspectives that are different from, the folks who are just in our amen corner, our, best sister friends, the people who are chosen family. When we go beyond that into what really is happening, we're so much better for it. And so I'm not suggesting that a white run network become solely Black, but I'm encouraging them to honor the truth tellers and to create space for them. When the content is something that's hard to digest, just sit with it a little longer. Don't erase it. Don't treat it as invisible. And then I think the most important directive or call to action I would have for us, Vanessa, is to stop begging people who have demonstrated an inability to get right with us, to stop wasting our gifts, our talents, our energy, hell, in some instances, even our petitions on trying to beg them to do the right thing when we have all that we need in terms of gifts, talent, skill, ingenuity, innovation to do it ourselves. So I would say to Black folks, don't be afraid of us. Don't be afraid of your shadow. Don't be afraid of our power. And know that we are worthy and we can also do this.
Yeah, I mean, April took mine, which was do better, but I would also say keep going is the advice that I would give, because, we're a year out from this reckoning, and you've already got some white Americans who are already like, I'm exhausted. This was rough. I did a lot. I read White Fragility. Maybe I gave some money to a couple of folks, and, you mean we have to keep doing this? Absolutely, because the reality is, if this is a reckoning around institutions, those institutions took a long time to build, and that inequality took a long time to really become entrenched in this country. And so it is going to take work. It is going to take time for that to be undone. I think it means a lot that you have an administration that says that they are committed to racial equity, but that administration must also be held accountable on that pledge, on that commitment. Because government being the original institution that perpetuated inequality in this country, it is why I am partnering with the Philadelphia Inquirer to do a whole project around the institutions, many of which were born here in Philadelphia, right alongside that origin myth that we love so much about the founding fathers and the framers that we can't tell enough, right? But what about how the first hospital or the U.S. Mint or the first penitentiary, all of which were founded in Philadelphia, how did those things also birth inequality? And how is the legacy of that inequality continuing to impact Philadelphians living right now today, right? Because that does give people a framework and an understanding of how to move forward differently. And I think that that's the thing, you've got a lot of folks that are feeling so bad about, the ugly parts of our history that we are raising, frankly, because it is relevant, and frankly, because we do need to tell a fuller history of this country, because that matters as a foundation for moving forward. But stopping at the telling of that fuller history doesn't leave any of us with anywhere to go. It doesn't For Black folks, it does not make us aware of the power that we do have. And for white folks, it does not make them feel like they can make different choices because I wasn't there, I didn't do it, even as they, continue to benefit from that legacy. And so, I think keep going and understand that things can be different, but that is going to take conscious choices and for these folks to literally put skin in the game to make things different on the other side of this reckoning, on the other side of this pandemic, and just as we move forward as a nation.
Well, I just want to say thank you to the three of you for having skin in the game, for keeping going and keeping us going, giving us hope, giving us direction, and really you're using your power and your platforms to help elevate us. I truly appreciate it, and thank you so much for this conversation. It was wonderful.
And so are you, Vanessa. Thank you for your work and your witness. We appreciate you so much and everything the Root is doing.
Thank you.